In the previous lecture, I shared with you the first axiom that runs through the entire field of psychology research: our behavior is determined by our genes. In other words, we humans are carriers of genes, and our purpose of existence is to ensure the efficient transmission of genes. In this lecture, I will continue to share with you the second important axiom in psychology: the brain provides physiological constraints for our psychology. In other words, the brain is the physiological basis of our psychology. Although the main driving force of our civilization today is no longer the transmission of genes, genes have set the initial parameters for each of us, which will guide our growth in the environment. As this course is called the Strongest Brain Psychology course, we must answer an important question: what is the material basis of psychological operation? What is the relationship between psychology, our brain, and our body? As early as the French Revolution in 1789, scientists proved through a bloody experiment that our brain is the basis of our psychology, not the heart as we often think. The specific experimental study was done as follows. Scientists found some royalists or revolutionaries who were about to be executed and asked them to participate in the experiment. They were told in advance that after their heads were cut off, the scientists would say some words to their severed heads. If the scientist said a noun, they should blink once. If the scientist said a verb, they should blink twice. The results showed that within 30 seconds after the guillotine separated the head from the body, the head made the correct response. Therefore, from this perspective, it is not an exaggeration in literature when a person's head is cut off in a martial arts novel and they can see their own back. Based on this result, philosophers proposed a more daring thought experiment. Imagine this scenario: a mad scientist takes your brain out of your body and puts it in a liquid that can keep it functioning. In order to maintain the connection between your body and brain, the mad scientist will also insert electrodes into your brain, which can connect your brain and body. Now, your body is on the beach. Your skin feels the heat of the sun and the breeze of the sea. All your sensory organs are telling you that you are on the beach. However, your brain is currently in a container in the mad scientist's laboratory. The question now is, where are you? Are you on the beach or in the laboratory? You may say, of course, I am on the beach. My sensory organs are constantly reminding me that I am on the beach, and everything feels so real. But because your brain is the carrier of your psychology, it will tell you that you are in the laboratory. So, who is right and who is wrong? To answer this question, we must first go back to Descartes' judgment about the physical and psychological worlds of each of us. In Descartes' view, each of us has two worlds: one is the external physical world, and the other is the psychological world we construct ourselves. These two worlds are completely independent of each other. In other words, how the physical world operates has nothing to do with our psychological world. The mind is the mind, and matter is matter. This viewpoint may sound absurd, but I believe that to some extent, you are also a faithful believer in Descartes' dualism. It is very easy to prove this. For example, if you don't want to go to work today, you will find an excuse to ask your boss for leave. Boss, my heart is not feeling well today, or I have a cold and fever. However, you will never use an excuse like this to ask for leave. Sorry, boss, I have been suffering from schizophrenia recently. I often see things that others cannot see and hear sounds that others cannot hear. You see, why do you dare to tell your boss that you have a cold and fever, but not that you have a mental problem? Because we all think that physical illness is normal, but mental illness is not. The idea itself is problematic. Our hearts can get sick, so why can't our brains get sick? Researchers used functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, to scan the brains of patients with schizophrenia and found significant differences in both the structure and function of their brains compared to those of normal individuals. In other words, mental illness is a disease of the brain. There is no such situation where an individual's mental state is problematic, but their brain is completely normal. Therefore, on the one hand, Descartes was right that there are indeed two relatively independent worlds, one is the physical world, and the other is the psychological world. However, on the other hand, our psychological world cannot exist without material constraints, and it is always constrained by the brain. It can be said that the type of brain we have determines the type of psychology we have. Our brain provides physiological constraints for our psychology. Returning to the experiment we just talked about, are we on the beach or in the laboratory? From this perspective, you can be on the beach or in the laboratory, depending entirely on how your brain analyzes the sensory signals it receives and how it perceives its own state. Body and mind are one, the reciprocal effect of psychology on the body. Since psychology and the brain are inseparable, and the brain can constrain psychology, can psychology also affect our brain and even our body in turn? There is a theory called unity of body and spirit, which means that if the body is healthy, the spirit will be healthy. Conversely, if the spirit is healthy, the body will be healthy. To test this hypothesis, my laboratory conducted a study. We found that the more anxious and depressed a person is, the worse their physical health will be. Conversely, when a person has more positive emotions, such as being happy, their physical health will be better. More importantly, the better a person can control their negative emotions such as anxiety, anger, and impulsiveness, the healthier their body will be. To further understand the brain mechanisms between emotional regulation ability and physical health, we used fMRI to scan the brains of these individuals and found that the core of the so-called unity of body and spirit is the amygdala. The amygdala is the center of emotional regulation in psychology, and in physiology, it is associated with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and the sympathetic adrenal medullary axis. You don't need to remember these two professional terms, but you only need to know that these two pathways are closely related to our cardiovascular system, immune system, and sympathetic nervous system. Therefore, when we regulate our emotions, we are actually regulating our body systems related to our physical health, such as the cardiovascular system and immune system. This just confirms a sentence from the Old Testament, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." So, the next time you experience some early symptoms of a cold or fever, you can try to think about what stress or unhappy things you have recently experienced, and give yourself a simple psychological release to eliminate stress, anxiety, and frustration. Once negative emotions such as anxiety, depression, and anger are gone, your cold or fever may be alleviated. From this, you can see that our psychology and brain are inseparable. The brain is the material basis of psychology, and there is no psychological world that exists independently of the brain. Therefore, what psychologists are concerned about is not an abstract psychology like philosophers, but a psychology that is integrated with the body, and a unity of body and spirit. This is also why neuroscience and psychology are becoming increasingly closely related, giving birth to a new interdisciplinary field, cognitive neuroscience. Cognitive neuroscience attempts to explore the mysteries of human psychology from multiple perspectives, such as neuroscience, computer science, psychology, and genetics.